I'm from the organization The Valley Stands Up, one of the co-hosts of this event. The other is the March for Justice. We want to thank the town of Deep River for the arrangements. And there are really two important points. We have marshals, the monitors, and the attractive, chartreuse vests. And the purpose of them is to remind everyone to stay off of the sidewalk and allow people to pass on the sidewalk, as well as obviously to stay out of the street. With that introduction, I'd like to go straight to our first speaker, which is Christine Palm. She's our state representative from the 36th district.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, friends. Boy, it's great to gather with you again. It's been a long, long time. Thank you so much, Deidregate Connecticut and the March for Justice, and especially the wonderful Valley Stands Up. Yay! Give yourself a round of applause. Housing segregation is a problem that has been with us all of our lives. I remember as a young reporter in the 70s doing a story about redlining in some of the towns I covered. And for those of you who don't know, or for the younger people, redlining was a practice of literally drawing with red marker areas where we wanted to concentrate people of color and steer white people away from in terms of housing transactions. Just a shameful legacy of that time, and even the Fair Housing Act of 1968 did not abolish that. And critical as talking about the racial divide is, I know our wonderful esteemed Sarah Bronin is going to be talking about that. I wanted to focus a little bit on the other economic justice issues, not in any way to minimize the importance of racial equity, but this is an argument where people mistakenly assume that it is only about that. In fact, young people need housing, people on fixed income, people who choose to go into lower wage jobs like social worker and teacher. These are people who can sometimes work in our towns but can't afford to live here. So those are people I also care about deeply in this argument, in this discussion. Some of you know that I created a thing called the Young Earner Prosperity Roundtable with the support of the governor, and it's really to help millennials and Gen Z members have access to government. It may surprise you to know that when we met, and these were young folks who did everything from third generation farming to high-tech IT stuff, and it was all across the state. We asked them, what is best about Connecticut and what would you like to see changed? And the things that they said were, what they loved about Connecticut may surprise some of you. Number one, there was consensus that family-friendly workplace policies, including women's right to reproductive justice, was terribly important to them, boys and girls alike. Number two, they loved the open spaces and the quality of life that nature provides for us. And third, they loved the access to support from the state for innovative startups. What were the three things that they disliked most about the state? Number one was the lack of affordable transportation and mass transit. Number two was racial segregation. And number three was that our cities are less than exciting. Increasing affordable housing stock would address all three of those problems. And so to me, this is all about helping our children and grandchildren stay in Connecticut if they choose to do so. Because right now, it is impossible for them to do that. I think Sarah, or maybe one of the subsequent speakers, is going to talk a little bit about legislation, but since I am most of you, I represent most of you, and for those of you from Westbrook and towns I don't represent, thank you for being here as well. I'm also not on the Planning and Development Committee, out of which most of these bills having to do with housing affordability emanate. I do want to give a shout out to our State Senator Norm Needleman, who is on P&D and who voted to advance these bills. I will certainly vote when they pass the bill. So in the middle of thinking about this conversation about equity, this is also a highly technical process. We have to talk about everything from zoning and permitting and land use to literally whether our sewers can handle additional effluent. So it's both philosophical, if you care about equity, and highly technical, which is why people like me rely on the experts of people like Sarah Bronin. Because we need all of your voices, we need our experts, we also need our advocates to have our back when we take what may be controversial votes. Apropos of that, I want to talk a little bit about a bill that died. Sarah will talk about some of the bills that are still living and advancing. There was a very, very good bill, House Bill 6611, has a technical name, an act concerning a needs assessment and other policies regarding affordable housing and development. I said this was wonky, but it would have basically assessed the housing needs by all 169 towns, set goals, and had enforcement. So would have had a legal remedy, which always gets people nervous, and then there was state support for that. That bill died in the Judiciary Committee, of which I am a member, for a shameful reason. One person who is a ranking member threatened to filibuster other bills for hours and hours and hours. And we're seeing this increasingly, guys. So when those of you ask me, why are you running so few bills? Why did such and such a bill die? The inside baseball is that there are those forces at the Capitol who really don't want a lot of bills to come to light. And threatening to filibuster or talk them to death is a very good way to make sure that a lot of bills having to do with equity and justice never see the light of day. This is where you come in. If you care about these things, make sure that your own state rep and senator vote the way you want them to vote. For those of you who are from towns where perhaps your state representative didn't vote the way you would like, please make your feelings known, to that person. Secondly, call your friends in other towns. This is a statewide issue. Every one of us elected to office gets elected by our district, but every vote we take affects the entire state. So there's a really interesting dichotomy there, and there are people who are afraid to take controversial votes for fear of not getting reelected. I would much rather not get reelected and do the right thing. And you need to reach the people who feel as I do and give them the support they need so that they will take the strong votes. And then two more calls to action, okay? So one is you're going to check out your own state rep and senator's voting record, and there's a simple way to do that. If you go to the Connecticut General Assembly website, you look at bills raised out of committee, and there's a tally sheet, and there are X's, yay and nay. You can tell exactly how everybody voted. Number two is talk to friends in other towns. Number three, make sure that my leadership, the Democrats are in the majority, make sure that my leadership calls these bills to the floor of the House. And the way you do that is call up the state capitol, and any one of the wonderful activist groups can teach you how to do that. I won't give those phone numbers out now, or you can write to me and I will show you. Little tip, don't let them say, who's your state rep? And then let them put you into my voicemail. I don't need to be convinced to do this. Say, no, I want it to go into the speaker, the voicemail of the speaker and of the majority leader. Those are the people who need to hear from you that you want them to give me and my colleagues the chance to vote, okay? It's a little bit complicated, but don't let them flip you over to me. And then, last but not least, I would say join and support some of these wonderful groups that work in our district. In addition to the ones who've organized this today, I want to give a shout out to Democratic Women in Action, Connecticut Shoreline Indivisible, Together We Rise. There are any number of wonderful progressive groups who always need membership and help and support, and they do yeoman's duty. So stay angry, stay together, and speak up. Thank you.
Hello. This is what democracy looks like.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful. So my name is Mariam Alavi, and I'm here representing the March for Justice, previously known as the Old Saybrook March for Justice. But we have extended our reach and are thrilled to include many more towns on the shoreline, from Deep River all the way down to Old Saybrook, Old Lyme, Westbrook, Essex, and of course any other towns who would like to join us in our efforts. And I will also introduce my friend here, Lucia. We have focused, we got started June last year, obviously, in outrage and reaction to the murder of George Floyd, and we marched every week and had speakers all the way until December, and now have a activist newsletter going out weekly. Our friend Dennis, who is standing over there waving, is the person to contact if you'd like to join our efforts and be on the newsletter list. So our focus has been trying to get towns to recognize that racism violates health equity and to work against that by adopting the resolution, to work towards zoning reform, increasing affordable housing, and recognizing that it's important to be inclusive in our communities. And I had a conversation with Norm this morning, who was very happy about the increase in affordable housing and working towards that in Essex, as well as Carl, our selectman in Old Saybrook. So hats off to those efforts, and a recognition that affordable housing is just a part, but it isn't what zoning reform is all about. And we know that that really requires a transition in our zoning laws as well as citizen action. We've also been very active in terms of education, inclusive education, and a look at our history, recognizing racist past and working towards teaching our communities about history and trying to be more mindful in the future. I'd like to point out David Good, who's standing over there. David, if you can raise your hand. David has been leading an effort called Public Arts for Racial Justice Education, and at this point we have close to 100 community members, active artists and others, from New London to Norwich to East Lyme, active in creating murals, statues, and other works of art to tell the story of the past and the hopes for the future. And of course, we've been very active in calling for police accountability in our communities. I am thrilled by every word that we heard from Representative Palm, and I don't want to take any time to repeat that. But let's keep our activism going, and let's make the state much more democratic than it currently is. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alicia Dolce. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Green Building Council. We're a nonprofit whose mission is to accelerate the healthy, equitable, resilient, and sustainable transformation of Connecticut's built environment. Our members are also leaders in stewardship of the natural environment. We believe that Connecticut's zoning regulations and state building codes need to be revised and updated to enable significant improvements in social equity, public health and safety, resilience and sustainability, environmental protection, and economic development. Connecticut's land use laws have locked in sprawl for far too long, and it's truly time to rethink how we create communities that are healthier, sustainable, and more resilient for the future generations of Connecticut. And so I stand here today to say that the Connecticut Green Building Council is very proud to be one of 68 organizations that have formed a coalition to stand up for zoning reform in Connecticut by supporting SB 1024. So 68 organizations, I think that's truly impressive, and I think it just shows the depth of support for this bill. And Christine, I just want to say, I really appreciate the tips you gave us about how to call the Capitol. Because so many times people ask me, what can we do? Or my representative is already, supporting this. How do we break through and amplify our voice? Well, I salute you. Thank you so much.
That'll be the first time.
Thank you. How you guys doing today? Love to hear it. So I'm speaking for the young people out there. So I know there's a lot of young folks like me, and it's really hard to understand zoning regulations and whether or not if you benefited from them or not. So me being from Colchester, living in a predominantly white community doesn't mean I won't stand up. So I've been raised in Colchester since I was 11, and within the last few months, I realized I benefited from the affordable housing out there that my parents were able to find back in 2009. That led me to build great relationships with my friends, great relationships with my teachers at the time, and now my work colleagues. So growing up in Colchester for the past 10 years, I rallied our first Black Lives Matter protest this past summer. So it was a pretty proud moment for me to build a protest like that in a predominantly white space, so which saw about 400 to 500 community members and allies who want to continue the work. And I'm proud to not only see Black community members out here right now, I'm so proud to love living in an inclusive community, and that Colchester is getting more inclusive day by day, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation out here in Deep River. I would like to imagine that surrounding towns like Lebanon, Hebron, Andover, East Haddam, and Coventry are having similar conversations, but ultimately conversations needed to be backed by concrete actions to make all these towns more inclusive and open to all different kinds of people. Ultimately, we need to desegregate Connecticut, and that begins with how we use our land and to include and exclude people. So this is why I support a bill, the SB 1024 bill, with provision designed to increase multifamily housing around main streets, to allow accessory dwelling units across the state, and to eliminate the historical racist use of term character to exclude families like mine. So now's the time for zoning reform, and thank you for standing up today.
Good afternoon, Deep River. It's great to see you all out here today. My name's Yvonne Klein. I'm from Darien, Connecticut, and we are happy to take the ride here today. I am the interim CEO for the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. I'm the former housing commissioner for the state of Connecticut and former first selectman for the town of Darien, Connecticut. So today, we are actually on the cusp of real zoning reform and real zoning change in the state of Connecticut. And I'm so proud to be a part of that, and so proud of all the work that Deidregate Connecticut has done during these past few months. So as first selectman, everything that has gone on, and coming here today, I was thinking about the work that I did in Darien as first selectman. And we worked really hard to create some kind of change in Darien. And I actually thought we got it all right. And then I learned, when I became housing commissioner, that there was more to do. So as first selectman, I formed an affordable housing commission, we wrote an affordable housing plan, we bought land to build affordable housing, and we passed an inclusionary zoning regulation, which allows affordable housing to be built as you build multi-family housing, which is a good thing, right? Very good. And I thought I was doing a good job for creating more opportunities in Darien and making Darien more inclusive. Then a few years later, I became the Commissioner of Housing. And I learned how deeply segregated the state of Connecticut is. And I didn't realize that it was so deeply segregated. So many in our department, we were shocked to learn that Connecticut is one of the most segregated states in the nation, with Fairfield County being the most segregated county in the nation. So clearly, I had a lot to learn and a lot of work to do. So, as commissioner and with Governor Dan Malloy at the head, we worked hard to make Connecticut a more inclusive state, provide more opportunities, and create more vibrant communities. And I'm proud to say that we were able to invest in 22,000 units of affordable housing throughout the state of Connecticut. We put money here in Deep River, I believe to your housing authority. We built units in Essex. We also invested in Old Saybrook. So a lot of work in this area began, and I hope is still continuing. So part of my other work was to co-chair the Fair Housing Task Force, and I did that with Representative Roland Lamar. We actually produced 5 pieces of legislation that year, and if we were lucky, it got to committee. And if it got to committee, it didn't get voted out of committee. And I'm telling you this for a reason, because that's how far we've come. In 4 years, we've come this far, where we have a bill that got voted out of committee with real substantive zoning change for our state. So, you know, we all worked really hard. Hundreds of you wrote testimony, testified, stayed up for 24 hours, and have written op-eds talking about how these zoning reforms will create greater opportunity, create more inclusive communities, and create healthier communities economically as well as environmentally. So here we are, we're on the cusp of real change. We don't have far to go to get this legislation over the finish line. So let's do it, and together, let's create a more inclusive Connecticut. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jim Crawford. I'm from Westbrook, and I'm a member of the Hope Partnership. For those of you who don't know about Hope, it is an acronym for Housing Opportunities for People Everywhere. It's a nonprofit that is strictly volunteer, and we have just completed our second major project, which is about 3.5, 4 miles from here at Lofts at Spencer's Corner down in Centerbrook. And I want to add a local touch to this that I think is really important to understand. There are 17 units in the Lofts. 170 people inquired about that. And of that 170, 122 qualified as folks who would be eligible under the current housing rules to be residents there. So 17 lucky families and individuals were able to move in, but the waiting list has 100 on it. This is not something anywhere distant from here, it's right here. The vast majority of the people who are on that waiting list are individuals. They're not families. There were, of those 170 inquiries, over 70 of them came from individuals. Individuals who work and live in our towns and really struggle. Many of them paying well over 50% of their income for housing. Well, I'm on the subcommittee for Hope Partnership that deals with education and advocacy. And our role is pretty simple when you state the mission, but it's very, very complicated when you try to put it into action. Basically, we go from town to town. We talk to organizations that will hear us, whether it's 2 or 3 individuals or large groups. We've talked to every major civic organization between Madison, East Lyme, and up to Haddam. That's pretty much our area of reach. Okay? We have one project active right now in Madison. And we're very, very happy to be in Madison because there's a Well, it's two things. We're a nonprofit, and there are deep pockets in this. And it is a very prominent location, right over the town line, right around Hammonasset, and there will be at least 28 units in there, and that project will be done in 2022. So what I want to urge you to do is, yes, please stay active. Yes, please keep this issue in the forefront. I want to share one thing that I have as a perspective as a former teacher, and that is that I think the hardest nut to crack here is when you talk to people about issues surrounding race and all the multiple ancillary problems that exist with it. Folks have a lot of trouble understanding institutional racism. They don't get it. They don't understand the systemic nature. This particular issue with zoning stands right out there. And, you know, when you tell people, we had a tremendous GI Bill after World War II. African-American soldiers weren't eligible. We need to tell that story. We need to tell people that. We need to tell them about redlining. They don't necessarily know, and you know, the response is, I know I'm not prejudiced. I don't know anybody who's prejudiced. What are you dealing with me for? Because the system is not working. The system does not allow for the most important word in the American lexicon, opportunity. It does not work. So we need to address that. Thanks for coming today. Stay active. And Angela, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Angela Cahill, and I'm president for the Connecticut chapter of the American Institute of Architects. I was elected to that role last year, and it's a daunting role. We have 1,200 architect members, and all of us can see the situation with the lack of equity in our communities. We are proud to support zoning reform. Architects not only help build communities, but our essential role is we are professionally responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of the public. The health, safety, and welfare of the public is directly tied to the need for equitable, sustainable, and prosperous communities. Our members see it every day. Our members that practice affordable housing see the struggles of getting those projects passed through the towns. Our members that practice with other market types, commercial, single-family residential, institutional, educational, libraries, they look at the lack of vibrancy in our town centers, and they realize it all has to do with the lack of equity in our zoning laws. So, as the overseers of the health, safety, and welfare of the public, it's our moral obligation to support the change that's needed for land use regulations. So we're here today to support this legislative effort, and we're at the finish line, as the speakers have said before me. Now, more than ever, is the opportunity to pass this through. Thank you.
My family and I first moved to Old Lyme almost 40 years ago, and just over 5 years ago, I helped Old Lyme and Lyme form its first refugee resettlement committee. We were one of the first towns to participate in IRIS's new community-sponsored resettlement program. And in case you're not familiar with IRIS, it stands for Integrated Refugee and Immigrant Services. It's a fabulous refugee resettlement and help organization based in New Haven.
and it's really making its mark in Connecticut and actually all over the country. So in my role as our committee's first chair, and ever since, I've done my best to welcome refugees with open arms, because like all of you, I believe that our communities are made better when we welcome refugees and immigrants and the friendship and the diversity they bring to our communities. Since we started, Old Lyme and Lyme have resettled 4 refugee families. But unfortunately, at the end of this school year, only 1 refugee family will still be with us. That isn't because the others felt unwelcome. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They can't stay because they can't afford housing in Old Lyme and Lyme. In the town of Old Lyme, it's illegal for 99.1% of land to build anything other than a single-family home. And that kind of blanket policy makes housing way, way too expensive. This very month, a courageous family who came here to escape extreme violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo, violence directed specifically at their family, a family that we welcomed, a family that made friends, started school, found jobs, is being forced to leave Old Lyme because they just can't afford housing. I know my town and I love my town. The people there are welcoming and kind, but welcoming and kind only goes so far when families are being uprooted because of exorbitant housing prices. Extreme housing costs are starting to tear our community apart, and this legislation that we're all here to support, SB 1024, offers us finally a chance to do something about it. It's important to acknowledge that it isn't just refugees who are affected. I have a friend in her 80s who's lived in the Old Lyme village for decades. She taught kids with learning disabilities in a neighboring town until she retired. She's always been active in church and community affairs. And it doesn't matter who's in need, she's always the first person to raise her hand and say, I can help that. So after a generous life of serving others, this past winter, she had to turn the heat down in her house to 55 degrees because when she added up the cost of home maintenance and utilities and taxes, heating oil was the only place where she could cut down expenses. She's a proud and a very wonderful woman, and she doesn't want charity. She just wants to stay in her town in a place where she can afford. So these are the costs of exclusionary zoning. Some people want us to think that developers are the only people who suffer from zoning restrictions, but it's actually our families and our friends. It's young people who want to stay in the town where they grew up. It's senior citizens. It's refugees and immigrants. People of all ages and races and incomes are being kept out or forced out. I'm proud to be a resident of Old Lyme, and I'm confident that with fair housing, which I believe SB 1024 will achieve, we can be one day a town that really is welcoming for everyone. Thanks.
Hi everyone. First of all, thank you to Representative Palm for being here today. Thank you to all of our speakers, to the Valley Stands Up, and to the March for Justice for co-sponsoring this event. I'm Sarah Broden, and I am here on behalf of Deidregate Connecticut, representing 68 organizations that have come together starting in June to create fair housing and more opportunities in our state. I've been so proud at what we've been able to do, and I'm so grateful to all of you for being here today, coming from Darien, from Westbrook, from Guilford, from Newtown, and of course from the shoreline. So thank you so much for being here. You guys are amazing. So as I said, Deidregate Connecticut started in June. We've been working really hard for the last few months to create a series of data-backed, common-sense strategies for zoning reform in our state. We've developed a zoning atlas thanks to Miriam Elahi and in her other hat of the Community Foundation for Eastern Connecticut. We've developed a website full of research, chock full of information. We've also done events with over 2,000 people all across the state who have just decided that they want to learn more about zoning reform, about zoning actually, and its impacts as well as opportunities for reform. And together we've really educated ourselves and each other about the deep effects that zoning has on our society, on our economy, on our environment. So what have we found? We found that that zoning has a segregative effect. We found that it's extremely restrictive in many towns. We found that it's a gatekeeper to communities. Even when people don't think or want to be have their land use laws have discriminatory effects, we can see that they do. Zoning is a gatekeeper. We've also learned that zoning has significant effects on our environment. Our one-size-fits-all zoning has essentially locked in sprawl. It means that we are pushing outward into farmland, into forest, and it means that we are overpaving our state with roads and development where it probably shouldn't be. We also have seen that there's a huge impact that zoning has on our economy. Not only is this an issue of housing and the fact that zoning constrains housing production, which means fewer jobs and less taxes for local and state governments because we're not bringing people to the state the way we should. It also means that people just don't have the opportunity to live in places where they work. It means that young people can't get a head start in their communities. It just locks out economic opportunity as well. You might have seen recent numbers that shows that Connecticut is dead last in housing production nationally. These have just come out over the last few months. We're not only dead last by a little bit, we're dead last by a lot. And that, again, has huge ramifications to our development as a state. So with all of this knowledge about how zoning impacts the environment, equity, the economy, we've come forward with a set of proposals. We're now armed with knowledge, and that knowledge has distilled itself into SB 1024, which is the bill that many people here have worked on, have advocated for, and are hoping to see cross the finish line. So it's important to say what this bill will do. It will help towns by giving them a form-based code so that they can start phasing out their use of the word character, which has been wielded by many towns as a sword to stop people from entering into their communities. SB 1024 will also allow for accessory dwelling units to be located on any single-family lot in the state. So what does that mean? That means that homeowners out there can increase the values of their properties by adding a small unit of housing, and that means that the refugee families that Faye was talking about, that the young people others have been talking about, will be able to find new housing in communities where they weren't able to in the past. We also have in our bill provisions about commissioner training. And it's not that, we think that commissioners are not well-meaning, but they just need more information about how their decisions affect not just their own communities, but also the broader region and, in fact, the state as a whole. These cumulative small decisions that are made in every town across the state have magnified effects on the state as a whole, and it's really a big problem for Connecticut. So this bill will provide the training that will help commissioners understand their role and understand how they impact the rest of us. And then finally, there will be technical provisions like the sewerage, septic, traffic standards, and other things that too often kill good development. So all of these things in SB 1024, these are things that you want. Let me hear you say, yes, this is what we want. Yeah. Right? Let's do this. So I hope that that state leaders up in the Capitol hear us, and we're really talking to, as Representative Palm said, to Speaker Ritter, to Majority Leader Rojas, to President Pro Tem Looney, and to Majority Leader in the Senate Bob Duff, who has co-sponsored our bill. So that's really great news, and we're really grateful for their partnership to date. But we really need for them to call this bill. And I guess I'll just ask you, your message to them is to call this bill, right? So let me hear you say, call this bill. Call this bill. Call this bill. Call this bill. All right. Yeah. That's what we want. We want for this bill to be called. We want for it to get a vote. We know there's a lot of support for it. 68 organizations who often are not on the same side of the table all the time. Some of these organizations have come together to say there's a lot of reasons for zoning reform. There's a lot of reasons to do it now. We cannot wait another year for this. This is a building block. This is a first step. People nationally have said what's in this bill could create meaningful change, but we know it's just a start. So thank you so much for being here from the beginning. Thank you so much for continuing to fight. And thank you for being here today. So with that, I think I'm the last speaker. I'll just say thanks again for coming. And keep up the fight.
Contact the legislative leaders and carry on.